Pulsex sacrifices are actually getting some free pulse. Did you know that? Did you know that there is also a way to extract value from your coins without actually selling them? I listened to this Richard Hart live stream yesterday, and there was 15 different points that I wrote down and I wanted to talk about because I found them interesting. I'm sure other people would as well. So, with that being said, if this is your first time here, what's good? My name is Sam, but for those of you who are returning, it's good if I can see you. If you're returning, I don't know why you're not already subscribed. So, let's get into the video. The first piece that I wrote down was issue with the node. So there was two issues. This is the second point. So issues with the node and issues with the sacrifice balances. Now the issue with the node, I didn't fully understand the issue with the node, but it seemed relatively trivial from the way that he talked about it. But also, it seemed relatively trivial by the actions, in the sense that at one point he mentions that he has 10 devs. Or 10 people working for him. I don't remember the exact verbiage, but that he only had one person working on the node issue and everybody else was working on the sacrifice balances. So, or at least other stuff, right? Presumably the sac balances. So when you think about that, the sacrifice balances is a much larger problem than the node issue, even though the node issue is just something that's brand new. The sacrifice balances have tremendous amount more manpower on them, so that I would expect to be finished relatively soon. With all the information coming out, it just seems like that's very, very close, right? Even the timing of this, which I think there's another point in here about the timing of this. One of the points that he made talking to, I also have some critiques in here too. I think that's in 2 or 3 spots. Actually, no, that's next. Oh, the emotional responses. When I think about how people respond to other people, and if you can see like their emotional state change, right? The pace of which they talk increases. The volume of their voice increases, the intensity, they might even lean forwards more, right? And the movements of their body are maybe a little bit faster. Well, this is something that I noticed in Richard Hart a couple times where especially Alex did a great job here because he didn't respond at all. But you can see that Richard had an emotional response when he was talking about something, and instead of and this is how impactful it was, enough for me to write this down. Instead of responding, the phrase that comes to mind is like, children, you can always tell when there's a quote somewhere, you can always tell if you're dealing with a child or an adult because children use emotions to respond or make decisions, and adults use what's between their ears or something to thereabouts, right? And when I see that coming through, it is distraction from the actual message. I think it's not I personally believe there's better ways to communicate than having an emotional response to something and coming off as attacking or defensive when it's just having a conversation, right? It's not that challenging, especially with this dude who's super chill, relaxed, not even, he's quietly listening, trying to learn, trying to observe. He appreciates what Richard is doing, and there's no sense in getting defensive and emotional in terms of your response. I noticed that. That was point number 3. Closer to the money. So I thought this was interesting. This is something that I talk to friends about a lot, or my girlfriend, anybody who's basically just trying to make more money type of thing in a sense. And the example that he used was, I don't remember the exact example, but the idea that came to my mind was, say, Google or Facebook and say Verizon, where the person that is closer to, or the entity that is closer to the money is going to receive more of the money, right? Facebook is closer to the money than Verizon is, right? Verizon is the framework or the infrastructure that Facebook is built on, right, in terms of the internet. So Facebook is closer to the customer than Verizon is, so they get more of the money. And on a more practical sense, if people are trying to earn more money, getting closer to the money by like getting into sales or getting into things that are where you're much closer to the flow of money has positive benefits if one's trying to get more money. How I think about this is if we're at the bonfire or something like that, we're 20, 30, 40 feet away from this bonfire and we're talking and you're like, oh, I'm cold. I'm going to tell you to move closer to the fire so that you can warm up. The same idea, same exact idea holds for money. You got to get closer to the flow of money, where the money is moving, and then inevitably you pick up on things and you learn things and you make more money. So I wanted to highlight that. It was something that I talk about with friends who are trying to make more money. So this is something that's I at least wrote down. Pulsex does not have single-sided liquidity. Was just a point that I wrote down. That would be nice if it did. I think Uniswap V3 does, I believe. So that would be nice if that comes out into the future. I think he kind of like implied it could be coming out in the future. Another point that I found interesting, this is more from a tax perspective, but locking in value in terms of capital gains instead of paying people extra coins. If you think about the effect on taxes here, at least in the West, in the United States, capital gains currently, there's another point of capital gains towards the end of this, but capital gains are not taxed currently, right? And if you receive like an interest or dividends or new tokens or coins, that could be taxed. It could be viewed as a form of income, right? Where capital gains are not, but you can still extract value from just capital gains. So I like that. I thought that was insightful way of putting it. Because when I think about the really, really macro, 100,000 view of how the global tax system works, when you decide to disincentivize people to make earned income, right? Like in the United States, earned income is the highest taxed income. So that's a disincentive to make earned income. What do you think people are going to do? Over time, people are going to shift from earned income to other sources of income. If you have capital gains, you can get that as income by getting out a loan easily, right? And that allows you to utilize the capital gains without paying any tax on it. I'm not a lawyer or a tax accountant, so you should fucking talk to your own. The next is opportunity cost. This actually came up at 2 different points during this talk. The point that I wrote down here, but I did remember him talking about it at a different point, was starting a business or just buying crypto. There are people that he's mentioned that he knows who are thinking about starting their own crypto or starting their own business. And from like a return standpoint, his point was instead of starting a business with all the cumbersome work involved, probably better from an ROI standpoint, to at least just financially speaking, because there's many other ROIs that could be considered in terms of like personal growth, the relationships you build through building a business. Like obviously none of that's considered here, but just from a financial perspective, buying a coin of some point or buying crypto can yield better returns potentially, right? It was his point. I was like, oh, that's a very interesting way of looking at that. From somebody who has a lot more experience in the crypto space than I do to say something like that, right? If you believe, that you can take things the Richard says at face value, right? Another interesting thing was social media on the roadmap and starting your own country. So social media in terms of like an ecosystem or another like social media of some sort on the potential roadmap, but goes on to say that that's very challenging, right? There's been plenty of those who've tried and failed, so it's pretty far down the road. And then starting one's own country is interesting because that's something that I've talked about over the last 11 years a number of times. There's a picture on Instagram, you can check down below, where I'm holding like a fake $1 bill, and instead of a dead, you know, president's head on it, I have, mine. Not a friend made it for me because I was like, yeah, I want to start my own country, and talking about some of the policies and whatnot there. So when he is talking about starting his own country, I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's something I've been talking about doing for well over 10 years. So I found that super interesting. This was also another point of view I found fascinating because I haven't seen anybody else talk about it in this sense. When Alex was talking about distance from the top, like right hex is down 80% roughly. It's, came down to around 81% maybe, but it's come down 86% before. And the point Richard was trying to make from my point of view was that if you look at a chart, I would pull one up, but I think my face is going to cover it up if I do that. Actually, let me see if I can slide my head out of the way. Okay. There we go. So if you look at this is hex, right? Now, if you look at, say, let's just zoom out a little bit. If you look at the prices down here versus up here, this point here at the top, say from, let's go from here, August, the end of August until, say, over here, October, right? The end of August to the end of October, a couple months. The duration of time where hex and this goes for any chart, right? If you look at any chart, that's how it looks. The duration at which point hex is at that peak is small relative to the amount of time hex is below that. So when you look at how people enter and exit the market, the number of people, right? The number of people getting into hex, and this is actually on my list of things to do for another video because I think this would be a fascinating data point, would be to take a look at the quantity of people, right? Because that was the point. The quantity of people enter more during, like, say it's a 7 or 8 months where it's down, right? I think it's around 7 or 8 months hex has been down right now. So if you figure 7 or 8 months is down and then 2 or 3 months it's up, or maybe the 7 or 8 months turns into like 12 months or 13 months, right? So 13 months where hex is down and kind of flat, and then maybe 2, 3, 4 months where it's up. The time is just disproportional. Like there's only a couple months where it's up, so the number of people coming in during that time may go up, right? Like clearly, because the price is going up, demand is increasing, but the total number is smaller than the total number of people that are coming in throughout that 13-month period. And I would love to be able to take a look at this and actually compare these. That would be fascinating. This is one, in terms of my words, I don't remember what was actually taking place here, but I've thought about this a couple of times. I think I even wrote it down to do a video on this in more depth. Hex, so to speak, is a hedge against the price going down. Because when you have some security or something that goes down in value, you lose that unrealized gain at that moment in time, right? It's assuming you don't sell, you're not going to really lose it, but people's emotional response comes in and said, my hex was $100,000 and now it is $40,000, right? And they're like, oh, I've lost so much. They haven't really lost that, but throughout that time, they're earning 30% plus. So if you're like, okay, that happened over the course of a year, and obviously the math makes it slightly different, but instead of having an 80% drop, there's a 50% drop because there's a 30% interest on top of there. So it's a hedge against the extremes, which is fascinating. It's hedged the downside in terms of the extremes, which is, I think that's an interesting way to structure something, enough to write it down. There was an update in terms of Pulsechain and Pulsechain success. And then we're going to get into a couple more points. Pulsechain, according to Richard, there's one of the largest exchanges. Right? I think I actually looked at Binance, and if you look on Binance, there's already some type of preliminary, logo and whatnot for Pulsechain on there. And according to Richard, according to them, right, which again you have to, take things at face value. So that means you don't know how much grain of salt you should add to that. That they have somebody they have a developer working on adding Pulsechain so that when Pulsechain goes live, it will be on one of the largest exchanges. Fascinating, very, very bullish, because that's going to have that ripple effect. Like when you throw a rock into a pond, right? It makes that initial splash, and then it ripples out across the rest of the pond. With Pulsechain getting listed, that's going to have a ripple effect positively on Pulsex. That's also going to have a positive effect on Hex, because it's going to make it way easier to get into both of those projects and just increase the awareness around them, right? If you increase the awareness, we saw this in the Google Charts, by the way. We have a video coming up probably tomorrow or later today. Wouldn't it be interesting to understand more of people's social interests around Pulsex and Pulsechain to maybe get an indicator? If one of them is way more popular, maybe it will perform better. That's what I'm doing in that video, where we took a look at Google Trends, YouTube search volume, hashtag usage on Instagram, on TikTok, Twitter growth, the growth of their website in terms of traffic, pulsex.com versus pulsechain.com, like a whole bunch of different metrics. So if you want to catch that video, make sure you subscribe and press the bell notification. Now, when he touched on SAC balances a second time, but relating to the sacrifice balances, relating to setting a date. And that means that if that is an accurate statement, if you can take that at face value, remember, according to Magundi was saying that he's been saying that things will be done in a couple months for a while, and that there's constant issues, and just being upfront about it. So to take that at face value, that there's no other potential issues that are going to be coming out, I don't know, but it is bullish. Like, I think that, I'm new to this, right? But I do believe it is very, very close along this line. I found that very interesting. The other interesting thing that I did not know, and I would assume a lot of other people didn't know, that sacrifices to Pulsex also get free Pulse. Yeah, that's awesome. If somebody sacrificed to Pulsex, they get free Pulse. That's awesome. It's just a trivial amount, I'm sure, just to do a couple transactions, but still new information that I'm sure a lot of people didn't know. Printing money to drive up asset prices and then tax unrealized gains. We talked about this earlier. There are some people, I think Elizabeth Warren, the crackhead, or the senator from, I think, Massachusetts, trying to tax wealth, right? Which is in essence taxing unrealized capital gains. So if we remember back to a couple points ago, locking in value in terms of price appreciation instead of printing new coins, because the tax consequences of that, the government, similar to, say, how Hex works, right? Like, you get the inflation if you're staked, kind of like how the dollar works, so to speak. where, except for there's no appreciation in the price. It's just been down for 90 years. If you look at how the dollar works relative to asset prices, though, it's kind of like how HEX works relative to staking. And when there's a tremendous influx of new dollars, that is, all those go to people who own assets, or like the vast majority of that goes to people who own assets. So when you think about the Ponzi scheme that is the government, you have a giant influx. You're like, how do you pay off your donors, right? How do you go through and pay off your corrupt crony people in government? The people who are also going to be owning assets, right? Because you're gonna help other people that you don't like, but you want to help your friends as well. By printing a stupid amount of money, an idiotic, stupid amount of money that dries up your crony and corrupt friends' asset balances, right? But then that's beneficial to them. But now you have this clown in, Massachusetts, and there's a couple other clowns like that, who want to tax capital gains. So here, let me put it into perspective. You hold dollars in your bank account, right? Now I'm going to increase the supply of dollars so that your dollars are worth less. But you're like, oh, okay, well my dollars are a little bit worth less, but I own a house I live in. My house has gone up by 40%. And then I'm like, let me tax that bitch on the fucking gains that she got or he got, right? So your house goes from 400,000 to 500,000 or whatever it is, right? And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm gonna tax that bitch on a fucking $100,000 gain on their property. It is such a clown show, and I like the way that it was placed there. Found that was kind of interesting. We just have a couple more to go through here. This is the one I actually wanted to had a question about. Towards the end of this podcast thing, Richard goes on to say that there's a couple ways to, and this is where I want to hear what your thoughts are, or if you know somebody who knows what he is talking about in terms of these loopholes, share this with them or ask them about it and then tag me on Twitter down below. He talked about the regulations that are being passed in the EU, how it's not good for crypto. And then goes on to say that he knows of a couple ways to potentially get around the regulations in the EU by transferring value without selling coins. So, like, I'm like, okay, debt on that, right? I don't think he's talking about like a mixer potentially, but I don't know, and I'm sure that there's plenty other cool things that I'm not aware of that I can learn about. So if that's the case, I would love to hear if you know what that might have been referencing, or if I think he actually mentioned two things there without selling them or doing two different things, but I only wrote down that portion. So if you know somebody who might know what that is or what he might be talking about, I'm curious to learn. Take a second and share this with that person and ask that question and tag me because I would love to learn. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you press that like button and the subscribe button. Take a second and share this with somebody else. Appreciate you. Talk to you soon. Peace. Don't forget to support down below too, or jump over to Twitter. And I've got that video coming up of the interest of where we believe, when you look at macro data, right? Google search volume, YouTube search volume, the number of views on YouTube, the number of content creators on YouTube creating content for Pulsechain versus Pulsex, right? Views for Pulsex versus views for Pulsechain, the hashtag usage, growth of Twitter, right? Like and their website traffic, all these different metrics, very, very macro level, because I think that might give us a better idea of potential popularity, which if you infer the more popular thing is going to have more demand, that might mean greater appreciation too in terms of this price. So if you want to catch that video, make sure you press the subscribe button and the bell notification. Peace.